Muchas gracias a todas y a todos por estar aquí. De nuevo. Muchas gracias a todas y a todos por estar aquí. Hoy tenemos una charla dentro de un workshop que hemos tenido sobre Mind and Self. A aquellas personas que estén interesadas en filosofía de la mente, filosofía de las ciencias cognitivas y en temas conectados, les recomiendo que aprovechen y le echen un vistazo, aunque bueno, si hubieran estado interesados, pues imagino que hubieran venido. Ese no es el problema, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, so thank you everybody. Our speaker today is going to be in the Seminario de Investigadores. It's going to be Giustina from the University of Valencia, who is going to talk about moods, subjectivity, and the structure of consciousness. We'll have like the usual scale, like 45 to 50 minutes. Then we will have a break where we can discuss a little bit and come back for the Q&A. Giustina, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. So in the last year or so, I've thought a bit more about moods, and I started exploring a new approach to mood experience. So I'm going to start with a little bit of personal background, like Andrew did and like Robert did, but it's less emotional, I think. It's more theoretical. So why I got here. So on the one hand, in my broader project, in thinking about consciousness in general, I'm trying to explore and develop an acquaintance theory of consciousness, on which the relation of acquaintance plays a central role in making mental states conscious. And in this big framework, one issue is to explain the qualitative character of experience, so the special way each experience feels like, and to explain the qualitative character, what I'm exploring is a sort of hybrid view such that the qualitative character is determined partly by representation of things. So the qualitative character is partly given by representing things being a certain way, so it has a representational component. It's not fully representational is because then I think that this is not sufficient. You need to be acquainted somehow with this representation. But so why moods? Because moods pose a problem for any representational account of qualitative character, and we're going to see that in a second. And so although there is another component, so I don't claim that representation is enough, still moods just don't seem to feature any representational aspect. And so I wanted to find a way to fit moods in this overarching theory of consciousness. So this is one way I got here. Like, so we need a different way to think about moods in this overarching theory. This is one thing. And another thing predates the acquaintance ideas. It's for many years, I haven't thought deeply before about moods, but whenever I read accounts of moods, they usually try to explain moods in terms of representing external things as being a certain way, and so giving a special representational structure. So the main views are such that moods represent the whole world as having some evaluative feature, or everything in the world, or anything one encounters in experience. And what all of them have in common is that they construe moods as somehow outwardly directed toward the world. It's a certain attitude that we take toward the world. And this has always been dissatisfactory to me, because I think that moods have to do not what is out there, but with what is somehow inside. And so what is pertinent, or what is relevant to the mood is some subjective aspect in the experience. It's not the worldly aspect. And so for this reason, I think that we need a different way of construing moods. And so, to put these things together, I got to the idea that perhaps moods are ways of being aware of one's own experiences, somehow ways of being aware of one's inner life, rather than ways of being aware of what is outside. And ultimately, one idea that I have in mind is that moods are ways of acquaintance. Okay, so this is the big way to put together the two things, the acquaintance theory and the intuition that moods are not outwardly directed. So this is like the big framework in which this is inserted. So here I'm not going to talk about all these things. This is going to be more restricted. Is because while thinking of moods as ways of inner acquaintance, I've started, so I wrote 2 papers, and like each paper I'm trying to kind of understand a little bit better what exactly I'm thinking. And so the stage I am now is that I'm exploring the idea that moods are not mental states, but rather they have to do with the structure of consciousness. They have to do with how our conscious field is somehow structured. I'm going to explain this. But this is why I'm talking about the structure of consciousness, because the proposal that I want to explore here is that moods are not discrete mental states, but they are structural features of consciousness. This is very exploratory. This is very work in progress, although I already wrote 2 papers, but like this is kind of a mixture of a paper that I've just finished and the paper that I want to write. But this is really work in progress, and any help is very, very welcome. So let's start. For those who weren't here in the previous talk, it was already about moods, just a little bit of introduction. So what are moods? What I'm talking about here are mental phenomena such as good mood, bad mood, elation, depression, serenity, irritability, calmness, anxiety, restlessness, positivity, melancholy, anguish, etc. Okay. This is of course not exhaustive, but it's just to give the idea of the kind of state of mind that I'm talking about. Roughly, we could say that moods are affective, occurrent, conscious mental states that typically, though not always or necessarily, last for a longish span. So there are occurrent conscious states, and so they have a characteristic phenomenology, affective phenomenology. And they are occurrent and conscious, so they are distinct from dispositional states, such as temperaments and character traits. And they are also distinct from emotions. So among the affective conscious states, we have emotions and we have moods. And they have something in common, but they have some fundamental differences. And this is why there is a way of focusing specifically on the nature of moods that doesn't reduce to the nature of emotions. So the main similarities are that both have affective phenomenology. They have valence. And for some moods, there is a corresponding emotion with similar phenomenology. For example, irritability and anger, anxiety and fear, or elation and joy. But then there are some differences. Moods tend to last much longer than emotions. This is a feature that helps us narrow in on the phenomenon, although many theorists don't take this to be a fundamental feature, a fundamental difference, but this help us to think about the phenomenon. Moods are pervasive and global. They have this kind of diffused character. They kind of take up the whole of our mental life. And moods don't seem to be directed toward a specific object. And this last feature is often taken to be what fundamentally distinguishes moods from emotions. There was a nice, in this computer it doesn't work, in my computer there was a nice transition from here. There were many of those in my PowerPoint, so it's not going to be so cool as I planned. But anyway, so this may be called the apparent undirectedness of moods. So the idea is that whereas emotions are directed toward a specific object, and being directed toward a specific object partly accounts for the phenomenology of the emotions, moods are not that way. So for example, when I'm angry, and I'm an emotion, I'm angry at a passenger in the subway who is listening to the music or watching a video on the phone without earbuds. I have a mental state that is directed toward the person and say represents the person as disrespectful. Whereas when I'm in an irritable mood, it's not that I'm irritable at someone or at something, but I'm just irritable. Granted, being irritable may put me in a situation where I have a tendency to get angry at someone more easily, but the mood itself is not directed toward a certain person, or a situation, or event, or thing, etc. So the idea is that moods don't seem to be about anything in particular, and they don't seem to be really about anything at all. My irritability just doesn't seem to be directed or represent anything. So the literature has focused on this particular feature, I think mainly for two reasons. One, just like I mentioned, because this is what seems to be the crucial distinction between moods and emotions, so in the emotional literature, but also in the literature about the nature of consciousness, because this feature of moods seems to pose a threat to representationalism, which is the most widespread theory of consciousness. And this is how also this is related to what I was saying at the beginning. So representationalism roughly is the view that consciousness consists in representing things as being a certain way. More precisely, for every conscious mental state C is conscious in virtue of suitably representing something as being a certain way. This is kind of an approximation that it will do for now. So for example, seeing a yellow banana consists in representing a yellow banana, so I'm in a mental state that is directed toward an object, a yellow banana, and represents it as being yellow. Or the emotion I was talking about before, like being angry at the passenger, represents the passenger as being disrespectful, and this is what accounts for the specific phenomenology of the emotion. But moods are different. They don't seem to have an object, such as a yellow banana or a passenger that appears as disrespectful. And so they seem to constitute a counterexample to representationalism. Now, representationalists have tried to find a solution to this, to save the theory. Usually this strategy consists in trying to squeeze moods into the representational engine by construing them as mental states that have a peculiar representational structure that somehow accounts for this apparent undirectedness. So basically the strategy is the undirectedness is only apparent, and we can find a way to explain it in the representational framework. For example, and actually, so the main strategy has been something like the following. Moods don't have a specific or particular content, but they have a generalized content. The idea is that moods represent the whole world, or everything in the world, or anything one encounters in experience as having a certain evaluative property. So, for example, elation consists in representing the whole world as, say, wonderful or rosy. The whole world or everything or anything. So there are different versions of the view, but this is the idea. Okay, so you have a kind of generalized concept. Depression, a depressive state, consists in representing the whole world as, say, pointless or black. So the strategy consists in construing moods content as generic rather than specific. And this is taken to account for the apparent undirectedness. So moods don't seem to be directed at anything particular because they're not directed at something in particular. They're directed at something like generic. And what is represented is external to independent of the subject mind. It's the whole world, it's everything in the world. And this is taken to say the representational framework. So then the debate around moods has focused on whether this is viable or not. And so the main objections to this come from the anti-representationalist side, saying, no, this doesn't work because moods are just, because moods are not directed at all, so you can't account for this, and so representationalism is false. And so in general, objections to this kind of view are aimed at destroying representationalism. My strategy is different. So on my view, the representationalist strategy is on the wrong track, but not because, or not necessarily, so we can be agnostic about that, not necessarily because representationalism is false. Rather, this strategy is on the wrong track because it is based on the assumption that moods are discrete mental states on a par with perceptual experiences, emotions, and thoughts. And so, and these are the kinds of mental phenomena that that can be accounted for in representational terms. My idea is that moods are just not the kind of mental phenomenon that can be accounted for in that way. The idea is that we can divide mental phenomena, conscious phenomena, into categories. On the one hand, we have discrete states or representations, such as perceptual experiences, thoughts, or emotional experiences, etc. And these are individual, discrete mental states in the stream of consciousness. On the other hand, we have structural features. And structural features, some examples are phenomenal unity, phenomenal temporality, phenomenal salience. And these are not individual states in the stream of consciousness, but have to do with the way in which consciousness is structured. So the way in which those individual mental states are somehow arranged in consciousness. And so my proposal to explore that I want to kind of put to your judgment is that moods should not be in this category, but they should be in this category. They should be seen as structural features. So the main motivation for going this way, my main motivation, is that this offers the best explanation of mood's peculiar phenomenal features. Then there is a secondary motivation that may or may not be appealing to you, depending on your views about the nature of consciousness. But for those who are attracted by representationalism, this is a way to potentially save representationalism. Because here the idea is that moods are not representational states, not because representationalism is false, but because they are not mental states at all. They are not the kind of mental phenomena that can be accounted for in representationalist terms. After all, any representationalist theory needs to have space for to account for phenomenal unity, phenomenal temporality, and phenomenal salience, and to account for them in a way that does justice to the fact that they are a different kind of mental phenomenon from discrete mental states. So the plan for the rest is as follows. So first, I'm going to present the main phenomenological peculiarities of moods that need to be accounted for. Second, I'm going to suggest that this kind of points toward a view of moods as structural phenomenal features. And finally, I'm going to suggest a potential way of spelling out this idea of moods as structural phenomenal features in terms of ways of inner awareness. So this is the plan. So phenomenological peculiarities. I'm going to consider these three phenomenological peculiarities of moods: apparent undirectedness, what I call undetachability, and what I call globality. I'm not going to say much more about apparent undirectedness. I already talked about this, and this is like the mainly discussed feature of moods. So the idea is that moods don't seem to be about anything. They don't seem to be intentionally directed. They don't seem to represent anything at all. Okay. I'm going to say more about the other two features because perhaps they are less discussed, or perhaps idiosyncratic to me, and you will tell me what you think. So the first is called undetachability. The core of the idea is that moods imbue and impregnate one's state of mind in a way that makes them undetachable from co-occurring conscious representations. Just to get a little bit into this idea, compare this with the colored lenses metaphor that is often used to describe moods. Moods are seen, like described sort of metaphorically, as a sort of colored filter through which we experience all our experiences. And so if moods, if we take this metaphor somewhat at face value, if the mood is the colored filter that through which we experience our experiences, then we need some experiences to be there, to be experienced, for them to be colored. And so for the mood to be present, you also need some experience to be there. So this is the idea. And this makes moods different from discrete mental states such as perceptual experiences, emotions, thoughts, etc. Because those can be picked out and mentally isolated from other concurrent experiences. So, for example, right now I have a visual experience at the computer screen, I have an auditory experience of my voice, I have a tactile experience of the soles of my feet, etc. And these, all these mental states I'm having right now can be conceived as occurring independently of the others. So I can conceive my seeing the screen as occurring regardless of whether I also hear my voice, etc. So these can be conceived in isolation from one another. They don't phenomenally appear to me as glued or kind of spreading onto one another. They are, so to speak, discrete, isolable, and local. But moods are different. Moods cannot be mentally isolated from other concurrent experiences. My generalized sense of anxiety that I've been having for the last many days is not mentally detachable from the rest of my inner life. Moods seem to kind of spread over and attach to other concurrent mental states. They are, so to speak, diffused and undetachable. To be sure, the idea is not that my generalized sense of anxiety that I'm having right now is undetachable but from my seeing the specific visual experience of seeing the screen. So as I can conceive the the seeing of the screen as independently of the hearing of my voice. I can conceive having an anxiety independently of having this specific experience of hearing my voice or seeing the screen. So that's not the point. The point is that moods don't seem to be conceivable in isolation from any experience. So there needs to be some experience there. And so this is the fundamental difference with this respect, with discrete mental states. So where perceptual experiences, emotions, and thoughts, etc., can be conceived as occurring independently of any other mental representation. So I can form a conception of a creature whose only experience is, say, seeing the screen. Moods are different. Moods are not conceivable independently of any other mental state. And so arguably, it's at least very hard for me to conceive of a creature whose only experience is a generalized sense modality. So if this is true, then moods need to somehow piggyback on other experiences and are not themselves individual self-standing experiences. So this is the untouchability feature. And finally, we have the globality feature, where the idea is that the occurrence of a mood does not just piggyback on the presence of some conscious states. So it's not that just some of my concurrent conscious states are those on which the mood piggybacks. The mood spreads rather on the totality of one's concurrent conscious states. It spreads over one's overall experience. And in this sense, they are holistic and global and pervasive. So to get this contrast the case of moods with the case of some metacognitive thoughts. So the metacognitive thought, I am thinking that Mexico City is beautiful, cannot occur in isolation from the first order thought Mexico City is beautiful. And so in this sense, it is undetachable from the first order thought Mexico City is beautiful. However, I can conceive the metacognitive thought together with its first order thought in isolation from any other experience. I can conceive of a creature whose only experience is the metacognitive thought. I'm thinking that Mexico City is beautiful. But moods are not like that. Moods don't just piggyback on one or some conscious experience, but rather they spread over one's overall experience. And they cast on each conscious state an affectively colored light. They infuse and affect the way each concurrent experience phenomenally manifests itself to the subject by laying on each an affective tinge. So the moods feature this kind of global attachment to the experience. All right, so we have, if we agree, I'm not sure that everybody does, but if we agree there are these three phenomenal features of mood experience, and we need to account for them. And here comes the second part. And my idea is that these peculiar phenomenal features cannot be explained in a framework where moods have a similar structure to discrete representational states. These features make moods different enough from discrete mental states that we need to construe moods as a fundamentally different kind of mental phenomenon. And this is why my proposal is to explore the idea that moods are structural features of consciousness. So I'm going to say a little bit more now about structural phenomenal features. So I'm going to consider three examples: phenomenal unity, phenomenal salience, and phenomenal temporality, just to give an idea of the family of mental phenomena that I am pointing at. So, phenomenal unity. So the idea is that at any one time we have a panoply of mental states. For example, seeing the blue sky, hearing music, tasting strawberries, smelling mint, thinking about consciousness, etc. And so we have a bunch of mental representations. and they occur at any one time, they occur simultaneously, they occur together, but they are also experienced as occurring together. They are experienced as unified. And this experience of unifiedness is phenomenally manifest. So it's an aspect of the phenomenology of experience. However, phenomenal unity, the experience of unity, doesn't amount to a further discrete representation on a par with tasting strawberry or smelling mint. It's not as if it was like another little cloud here among the others. It is something that has to do with the totality of them. And so it doesn't itself amount to a separate representation on a par with the other ones that attributes unifiedness to my experiences. Otherwise, just thinking that all my current representations are unified would be sufficient for them to be unified, but this doesn't seem to be the case. Rather, unity is a structural feature of consciousness. It pertains to the way distinct concurrent mental states relate to one another. And it has to do with how I experience the totality of my experiences as unified, rather than to what I experience. Now, phenomenal salience. So phenomenal salience basically is the phenomenon such that some of the mental state, the conscious states in my current conscious field are foregrounded and others are somehow backgrounded. So I take this example that IA uses and Sebastian Watzel uses while talking about phenomenal salience and attention. So suppose that you're at a jazz concert, and so you're at the jazz concert, and first you're attending to the sound of the saxophone. And so there is the sound of the saxophone that occupies the center of your consciousness, and the sound of the piano and the sound of the drums. They occupy a little bit back. And then perhaps you'll have a very mild pain in your back, and that's even farther away towards the fringe of your consciousness, and perhaps your feeling of the chair under your butt is even less salient toward the fringe. And so the phenomenal field is structured in this background and foreground way. Then when you switch your attention, you move your attention toward the sound of the piano, from the saxophone to the piano, then it is the sound of the piano that occupies the center of your phenomenal field. But when this happens, it's not that a new item appears in your field of consciousness. It's not that you enter a new mental state, as if when I turn my neck and I see this violet thing, I have a new mental state. So that's not what happens. Rather, what happens is that the whole conscious field is restructured in such a way that the piano sound comes to the foreground while other items in my overall state of consciousness recede to the background. And to be sure, this makes a phenomenal difference. It is a phenomenal difference. So the first situation where the saxophone is in the foreground and the second situation in which the piano is in the foreground are phenomenally different. But this is not accounted for by a new mental state popping up. And finally, very briefly, phenomenal temporality. Roughly, the idea is that every experience in the stream of consciousness is experienced by me somehow as succeeding the previous experience and preceding the next one. And again, and this is something that phenomenally affects the way I experience my experiences. However, the experience of phenomenal temporality, again, is not an extra mental state in the stream of consciousness. Rather, it is the way distinct experiences in the stream of consciousness relate to one another and are experienced by us as bearing the information to each other. All right, so these are some examples of structural phenomenal features, and now I'm going to suggest that these structural phenomenal features share the phenomenal peculiarities that I have highlighted about moods. So first, they are undirected. So consider the questions: what is phenomenal unity directed at? What is phenomenal salience directed at? What is phenomenal temporality directed? What do these things represent? These questions seem awkward. They don't seem to be fitting. Why? Because phenomenal unity, phenomenal salience, and phenomenal temporality, as I pointed out, are not discrete mental representations on a par with perceptual experiences, emotions, and thoughts. They concern the way these experiences are structured. And that don't they themselves amount to a representation, discrete representation of something in the world. They are undetachable. For I cannot form a positive conception of a mind whose only experience is phenomenal unity, or phenomenal salience, or phenomenal temporality. To experience phenomenal unity, salience, and temporality, there need to be a bunch of experiences that are experienced as unified, as foregrounded, backgrounded, and as such succeeding one another. So for the structural phenomenal feature to be instantiated, you need some experience to be there, to be structured, and experienced as being structured in a certain way. And finally, these features are global, in that whatever experiences one happens to have at a given time, so simultaneously, they are phenomenally unified. They are experienced by the subjects as co-occurring and being unified, and phenomenally foreground background structure. And all the experiences in one stream of consciousness are temporally structured. So each experience I have, minus the first, is experienced as succeeding another, and each minus the last, arguably, is experienced as preceding another. So basically, the idea is that structural phenomenal features not only are attached to the other experiences, but they are attached to the whole of one's experiences, either at a time or across time. And so structural phenomenal features share these phenomenal characteristics of modes. And this, I suggest, gives us, this is not, of course, an argument, but this at least gives us prima facie reason for starting to see moods as belonging to this category rather than to the category of discrete mental representations. Now comes, I think, the most tentative part of the talk, as if the rest was like uncertain. But this is really I really want your feedback because it's very tentative. But because, so a lot of the work to do now here is so we have some phenomenal features that seem to be characteristic of structural aspects of consciousness. But now, how do we characterize the structural aspect of consciousness? And so, like, what are the characteristics that a phenomenon has to be considered as a structural feature? I have nothing, like, not even close to this, but I have some hint. So I'm going to consider two features: relationality and ubiquity, and then you'll tell me what you think. So the first, relationality. So the idea is that structural phenomenal features have to do with how all of one's experiences relate to each other. So they have to do with relations. So in phenomenal unity, the relevant relation is unifiedness. So all the experience of a subject that they are experienced as unified. Phenomenal salience, it is foreground, background relations. And in phenomenal temporality, it's temporality relations. And so here it comes, like the tentative thing. Perhaps in mood, the relevant relations are affective similarity relations. So the idea being that when one is in a certain mood, all of one's experiences at a certain time are experienced as bearing affective similarity relations to each other. And so The idea would be that moods are structural features of consciousness in virtue of which all of the experiences of the subject are tinged with the same affective color. And so, in virtue of being in a certain mood, all of the subject's experiences are affectively similar. So, this is the first relationality, and then ubiquity. The idea is that structural phenomenal features are present whenever one is conscious. And so, for example, with phenomenal unity, the idea is that at any time t, if S is conscious, all of S's experiences are experienced as unified. Phenomenal salience, again, the idea is that whenever one is conscious, one's experiences are experienced as having this foreground-background structure. And in phenomenal temporality, again, whenever one is conscious, the experiences are experienced as temporally structured in a certain way. And so here comes a very perhaps controversial idea. So if moods are structural phenomenal features, then whenever one is conscious, one is in some mood or another. So whenever one is conscious, all of one's experiences are experienced by the subject as being tinged with the same affective color. You may immediately disagree and say, well, we are not always in a mood, we're sometimes are in a mood, but not always. So mood is not ubiquitous in the same way as unity, salience, and temporality. Here I have a couple of suggestions to kind of try to resist, but again, it's again just prima facie, I think. So the first thing I have to say is that mood phenomenology may be very subtle and elusive. So sometimes moods occupy the foreground of our consciousness, so their presence is very vivid to our mind. But very often we're busy with things of life, and it kind of just lay at the fringe of consciousness. They are peripheral. And so in those cases, one might just fail to notice the mood and thus fail to realize that one is in a mood. So this may be part of the explanation. Another part of the explanation is that some moods are very intense and very with a very strong affective characterization, but some moods may be blender or more blandly valenced. And we may say that the blended mood is the neutral mood. And so we may say that whenever we have the impression that we are in no mood, we are actually in the neutral mood. And this could make sense if we kind of see moods in a sort of like affective space with like, we have different dimensions, valence, and other phenomenal colored characteristics. And like in the center, there is the neutral mood. And so we'll see how many objections, I guess. But anyway, this is the idea. So yeah, in the last few minutes, I'm going to suggest. So this is a very like rough and general idea, and there are so many details to fill out, both about like what structural phenomenal features exactly are and how moods should be considered as structural phenomenal features in virtue of having the right characteristics. So that's a lot of work to do in that direction. And a lot of work to do is also in the direction of saying more about exactly how this has to be implemented in a theory, in a specific and detailed theory of moods. I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to hint at an idea that I have. So this is going to be very, very sketchy. I have a little bit of more details in the paper that I just finished, but there is a lot of work to do still. So the idea is that moods are ways of inner awareness. Very roughly, the idea is that moods are ways of being innerly aware of one's own experiences. So first question, what is inner awareness? Very quickly. So at any one time, we have a bunch of experiences. We are aware of things in the world. And the idea of awareness is that we're not just aware of things in the world, but we are also aware of our own experiences of the world. So for example, when I see the screen, I have a visual experience of the screen, I'm aware of the screen, but also at the same time, I'm aware of my seeing the screen, the screen. I'm aware of my experience. Many philosophers think that not, but think that we are always aware of our experiences in this way. So inner awareness is awareness of our own experiences. To be sure, this is a very minimal kind of awareness, usually taken to be a minimal kind of awareness. So in particular, it's not necessarily introspective. It's not necessarily that we are attending to our experience the whole time. This would be very implausible. So inner awareness is a sort of non-attentive, non-conceptual, non-thought-like, and non-inferential background, peripheral awareness of the conscious states we're currently undergoing. And most theorists that think that inner awareness is a real phenomenon think that it is ubiquitous to our conscious life. And they adopt what may be called the awareness principle, such that for any subject as time t and conscious mental state c of s at t, s is aware of c at t. So this is the inner awareness idea. We are always aware. Every conscious state that we have is accompanied by an inner awareness of it. All right, so now the core idea of the inner awareness view, the ways of inner awareness view of moods is the following. It's based on two contrasts. The first is that moods involve awareness of something inner rather than something outer, okay? And the second is that moods have to do with the way one is aware rather than to what one is aware of. Now I don't have the time to give motivation for this, but so the motivation for the first part is what I was mentioning at the beginning, that what seems to be relevant in moods is the subjective aspect, some inner aspect of experience rather than something external in the world. So I have a lot to say about like this to give the idea of this subjective salience phenomenology, but I don't have the time. If you're curious, we can talk about it later. But so basically the idea is that what we are innerly aware of are our experiences. So it's, in this sense, it's something concerning our inner life. And the relevant ways are affective ways. So at the first approximation, moods are affective ways in which one is innerly aware of one's own concurrent experiences. By assuming the awareness principle, the idea is that inner awareness somehow comes in different modalities or in different kinds in virtue of the occurrence of a certain mood. So a bit impressionistically, like a colored filter between the experience and the subject's awareness of it, the mood contributes with an affective tinge to the way the subject is innerly aware of the experience. So that the relevant experience is not just experienced, one is not just aware of the experience, but affectively experienced. So for example, in elation, you'll experience, when you're elated, you experience all your concurrent conscious states through a rosy and shiny light. When you're in a depressive state, you're aware of the totality of your experiences through a dark, meaningless, and empty light. In anxiety, you experience all your concurrent experiences through an affective filter of terrifyingness. Perhaps this is too strong for some people, but you have experienced my anxiety. But anyway, so you can put whatever. So these are just words that try to latch on a certain kind of affective phenomenology, etc. To be sure, inner awareness, it's not that the inner awareness attributes rosiness, meaninglessness, or terrifyingness to the experiences. Rather, what one is aware of in inner awareness is just experience. But the mood determines how you are aware of your experiences. So the mood on this view doesn't amount to being in a mental state that has a representational content, my overall experience is rosy, terrifying. So just to be sure. So the core idea, a bit more precisely, is if subject S is in mood M at time t, then for any conscious state C of S at t, S is innerly aware of C in an M moody way, where the M moody way is the way that is specific to the specific mood, the affective kind of color that is specific to each mood. So this is just a kind of characterization of the broad approach to moods. Like I said, there are many details that have to be spelled out. I'm not even going to list them because I still have only 2 minutes. And so I just want to say a couple of words about the relation between these ways of inner awareness view and the structurality idea. So first, moods as ways of inner awareness, so construing moods in this way, explains the phenomenal peculiarities that moods share with other structural features. So first, undetachability. Inner awareness spreads over one's concurrent experiences and cannot be detached or isolated from them. Inner awareness is awareness of experience, and it cannot be mistargeting. Inner awareness is factive. And so if S is innerly aware of a mental state C, then C is occurring. And so and S could not be so innerly aware in the absence of C. Secondly, globality. Inner awareness is undetachable from the totality of one's concurrent experiences, because every conscious experience is such that one is inherently aware of it. And finally, undirectedness. If moods are construed as ways or modifications of inner awareness, they're just not the kind of thing that can have a direction. Although modifications are modifications of something, they are not directed at anything. Secondly, inner awareness has the characteristics that make moods similar to structural features. I talked about relationality and ubiquity. I know that it was very tentative, but so about relationality, this is also kind of S is innerly aware of all one's current experiences, and so all of one's current experiences feature the same inner awareness. And so whatever affective color inner awareness has at T, all of X's experiences will be experienced as tinged with that color. And so this accounts for the fact that all the experiences share the same affective color. And so they bear these affective similarities to each other. And finally, ubiquity. Recall that we are assuming the awareness principle according to which all conscious experiences are such that one is aware of them. And so inner awareness is ubiquitous, and if moods are ways of inner awareness, moods are ubiquitous too. Okay, so to conclude. First, so the issue is that moods seem to be recalcitrant to representationalist treatment. So we need a new approach to moods, and I have suggested that the strategy should be not to go necessarily anti-representationalist, but to have just a completely new approach. I have listed the main phenomenal peculiarities of moods and suggested that this point in the direction of a view such that moods are structural features of consciousness. And finally, I've tried to throw for you a possible way to spell out this idea. Thank you.
Very much, Anna. And we're gonna have like 10 minutes break. Here, if you just go out to the right.
We're very strict with the time.
We're very strict with that. I was thinking.
It's classified and as you wish.
I have a lot of specific thoughts on like the various principles that you were.
Maybe sí, estoy completamente de acuerdo. Yes. Later? Yeah. Yes. Maybe around the open.
I have like.
Okay. So, Axel, please.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I love this. I don't know how you can look at me. Yeah, I like this model. It's great. I work on structural features, so I love when the structural features are called into explaining anything. But also, you probably know there's a lot of skepticism that there really are such things as structural features, right? Because there's always attempts at trying to reduce structural features into lower level features. And these arguments kind of bear directly on your proposal, because these are the kind of arguments that try to explain why things like unity and salience and things like that can still be accounted in like hardcore representation. So, for example, like concurrence, like you say that, of course, it's part of the phenomenology to feel this experience as co-occurring. But there's the other explanation that you say like, no, it is the content of those experiences, the ones that are concurrent. Yeah, your experience are about events that are happening at the same time, and that makes them at least metacognitive, if not at least first cognitive, and therefore there seems to be no structural features on which you can build your own proposal. So how do you respond to this kind of argument?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, very good. So the main claim is that moods are different and should be accounted for differently from discrete mental states such as seeing the bottle, hearing my voice, etc. And so there is at least a prima facie intuitive distinction between a category of discrete mental states, and so at least prima facie there is this distinction.
Yes.
And given this prima facie distinction, we need to have an account of structural features or whatever appears to be structural features that does justice to this distinction, in the sense that does justice to the datum that they have. There is something different to them with respect to discrete mental representations. So ultimately, one may want to account for them in representational terms, but then it has to be a peculiar kind of structure. And a peculiar kind of structure that takes into account the fact, what I was mentioning, the undetachability and this kind of universality or globality or ubiquity. So yeah, and also that deals with the immediate objection that I would have, namely, if phenomenal unity is just a discrete representation on a power with perceptual experience and thoughts, etc., then, I mean, it's kind of obvious, then you have a sort of infinite regress. And so you have to deal with that. And the last thing that I want to say, regardless of, I mean, if we want to account for structural features in these terms, perhaps in terms of representations with a generalized content, where the content is one's overall experience, that could be a way to go, and I could be cool with it, and I could even be cool with a potential development of the moods as ways of inner awareness view, such that inner awareness, that's not what I want to do, but that's a potential way to develop this idea that inner awareness is meta-representation. So, as in meta-representationalist views of consciousness, and moods consist in taking a certain attitude toward this overall content, which is one's overall experience. So this could be a one way to go that kind of tries to do justice to the fact that moods are somehow similar to those structural features, and tries to do justice to all the phenomenal characteristics, still in a framework where structural features can be accounted for in a special way in representationalist terms. So this is one idea that I have in mind, for example, to deal with, so to be kind of open to any kind of development that is consistent with the constraints that I was trying to put. Thank you very much.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
What's your name?
Lara. Yeah, I had 2 questions.
Just one, please.
Okay,
One question.
so it's on the distinctions between emotions and mood, because it's not that clear to me how you can say that it is a qualitative distinction, because one could say that mood is a prevailing emotion or a mixture of emotions. And yeah, I would just.
So the idea is that mood is a very intense
Or a
emotion.
complex of different emotions.
So I have, I guess, 2 things to say. One is that, so if we want to theorize about moods as a distinct kind of mental phenomenon, the crucial difference is that the moods seem to be just states of mind, just states that occupy the mind, and they are not direct. They don't feel like I'm angry at something and someone. So there is that. So if we accept that there is a phenomenon there, then this seems to be one of the most fundamental differences. And the second thing is that I don't think that it is sufficient to do justice to the peculiarity of moods to say that it's just a complex of emotions or a very intense emotion, because so what I'm thinking is that perhaps when we think of that a very intense emotion is actually a mood, what is going on really is that there is a very intense emotion and it causes being in a certain mood. And so there is an emotion that is directed specifically toward the situation or an object, and that's the emotion. It's distinguishable from the mood that is kind of facilitated or caused by it. And that's a generalized state of mind that no longer has to do with the specific object of the emotion. It's something that then takes up your whole mind. And so I would account for that rather in terms of causal relations rather than constitutive relations.
Thank you. It was a very interesting talk. I just have a worry when you say exclusively about moods that they you describe them as awareness of something inner rather than outer. And the source of this worry is, first of all, like let me give you an intuitive example of me being irritable and then coming inside the room and seeing Sebas and going, oh, there he is. It's not like I have an anger directed towards Sebas. I don't need to have anger. Allow me this intuitive example. So if you see the phenomenology of this experience that I have, it includes something outside, not just an inner awareness. It includes the room, Sebas, and it makes my mood like sort of fluctuate in some way to become something that I experience in a different way other than when I was outside and not seeing him. And my intuition, you might have another one, is that this outer aspect of my experience is not, if you allow me that I'm not angry at him, not at all, I'm just irritable. This outer aspect of my experience cannot be explained by a mental state, such as an emotion or even my perception. So my way of accounting for this outer aspect is to remind myself of the phenomenology in general, how people have talked about phenomenology of moods, such as Matthew Radcliffe, coming from Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, talking about moods as the phenomenology of moods as ways of being in the world. Mm-hmm. So that's one way I can account for the outer aspect as being something related to just moods and nothing else. What I wanted to ask you is if you have another way of accounting this outer aspect in some other way that is not related to moods, because you say it's just inner awareness.
Yeah, what I would say is that what do you think of this? So you're perhaps not angry at Sebas, but perhaps you are I don't know, you have some kind of emotion towards him. So like him showing up, it is a certain emotion, but it is an emotion that is causally related to your mood. So my idea is that these moods, the moods affect one's overall experience, and they have this kind of functional role of clustering all of one's conscious states around a certain affective color. And so when you're irritable, you have a tendency, so you have a bunch of dispositions of having certain thoughts or noticing certain things or having some emotions, and so having some mental states that relate you to the world in a certain way. But these are just consequences of the mood. These are mental states that are caused or facilitated by the mood, but they don't constitute the mood itself.
But that would mean that you're rejecting the intuition that I could just come into the room and not have any emotion, just the mood. And even if it's like a structure of my experience, my perceptual experience is colored by my irritability, you would reject that example that I gave you.
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of offer a diagnosis such that seeing Sebas kind of triggers in you a certain emotion, for example.
No, I was stopping. You can.
Yeah. Yes, I would say that. Perhaps just one idea that I just had in mind. One might think that if moods are ways of inner awareness, and so they tinge the experience with a certain color, perhaps one may have a sort of transparency thing, such as like if my visual experience is colored in a certain way, then the visual experience, the phenomenology is just the representational content. So kind of the affective color goes through. I don't like it because one of the intuitions for the subjective status is that things in the world don't seem to have those affective qualities. So the moods seem to be completely independent, but from how the world appears to me. But that's a separate thing. Perhaps one could go transparency to account for your intuitions.
Great. We can discuss more.
Jeff, please.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, this was super interesting. I was sort of trying to think about this idea of seeing the world through a particular lens and getting the swing of your way of thinking of it. I mean, one thing is one thing is that I feel like at least part of that, when I'm trying to imagine things like depression, is that it seems kind of dispositional. So part of it is like just disposition to have certain types of thoughts, or disposition to have certain kinds of emotions towards things, like if you're irritable, you're annoyed with people. But I think I am with you that there is also this just kind of phenomenal lens that can be there. Although I sort of suspect that's only part of what we're talking about when we're talking about a movie. I don't know. It's just my intuition. And then, but then I was just thinking, like, what are some clear examples that I can get a handle on? I mean, one is just like enjoyment, like if you're enjoying an experience. That's like a way of experiencing a thing that's in front of you. And then often, I think depression often is just this kind of absence of that. Actually, it's not like a positive way of experiencing. It's more like it's just this absence of the enjoyment that you might feel if you're not depressed. But then, yeah, I'm not entirely sure like how to model like something like enjoying experience. It's not clear to me that you need something like inner awareness of the experience. Like it could just be sort of adverbial, like an experience and enjoying. Or it could be that you could go really hardcore transparency and be that say something like the object of experience looks enjoyable. So I wasn't entirely sure like what motivates your particular kind of inner awareness way of characterizing the sort of this lensy way of thinking. So that was my argument.
Yeah, so, and by going adverbial, so do you just mean that these are just modifications of the subject, and so that there's modes are just modifications of the subject, and there's nothing more to say about them, or do we, yeah?
Well, maybe not moods overall, but just like the aspect of a mood that involves experiencing the world, you know, in a particular way, like the sort of actively phenomenal part of the mood.
Yeah. So. Like
why should it involve inner awareness rather than some modification of my experience or presentation of the world being a certain way?
Yeah, so this would be close perhaps to Uriah's view. Correct me, but I guess Uriah's view such that moods consist in taking a moody attitude toward things in the world, and so the mood is in the attitude, what he was explaining before. So my main problem with that is that still, like, there is this kind of outward directedness that doesn't seem to capture the subjective salience idea. Then we may disagree on that intuition, and so okay, but it seems to me that it's really the experience itself that is modified, not like the way things appear to me. So that's why I would still go with ways of inner awareness, and ways of inner awareness, so they do account for modifications in how the experience appeared to me, because inner awareness has a certain kind of phenomenology that attaches, like, and so being inner awareness being colored, it kind of reflects on the experience itself. It's the experience itself that is experienced as colored. So that would be the.
Okay, we still more later. Thank you. Yeah.
Santiago.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for asking my question. But I will try to give a different. I really like your thoughts. So I'm interested in the relationship between this positionality and these structural phenomenal features, because one might think that there is a principal difference between, and you mentioned that, traits of character that are also dispositions and moods. Is there an explanatory relation between these structural features and the dispositionality of moods? So one might think that I'm disposed to act in some ways when I'm irritable because that's the way I'm structuring experiences. Yeah. So would you claim that there is this explanatory relation? How would you develop it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, develop is a big word.
Yeah, but
it's somewhat related to what I was mentioning before. And yes, I do agree that moods do have this kind of dispositional role, and they seem to be sometimes caused or facilitated by some emotions, and they seem to cause or facilitate some other emotions or even other mental states. And so exactly, I think this as an advantage of the structurality view that in virtue of coloring all the experiences with the same affective color, in virtue of this, the mood as way of the mood kind of clusters all of one's experiences around that color, and so this kind of triggers some new dispositions.
A little bit. So I was thinking of framing that in the metaphysics of dispositions.
Mm-hmm.
You could have not the most fundamental categorical base, but something that is maybe not dispositional that grounds this dispositional character. So that's something a little bit more fundamental that explains this profile. So that's what I recommend.
Yeah.
That would be a substantive claim, but that would allow for a difference between moods and traits of character.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's why I was thinking that I was thinking of the phenomenology as that thing. So in virtue of the phenomenology, of the affective phenomenology, and so this is what makes the difference with merely dispositional states. Yeah.
Torre, please.
So I also thought this was great. I really appreciate it. I'm wondering what you think about. So I guess, sort of have some worries or thoughts about the rose-colored lenses analogy. Partly because I feel like I'm not sure that, for example, if I'm in the dentist chair and I'm in a bad mood or I'm in a good mood, that the pain feels any different at all, right? I'm inclined to say something along the lines of, I don't know. I just wonder what you think about this. So once you kind of move to something structuring, part of me wonders whether or not there's a similar view that says it's not actually something conscious itself. It's actually something that modulates one's responses to conscious properties. Perhaps it gives rise to other conscious properties as a result of, experience. And so I might, get the drill and I might have a sense of, active irritation so the idea would be something like, instead of rose-colored glasses that are upstream, it's something downstream that actually modulates later responses. So maybe it's more like an Instagram filter or something like that. So I don't know, and so that doesn't actually have it be a structure of consciousness, but it's similar in a certain way in that basically it affects consciousness, but not by sort of pervading it.
Yeah, that's an option, but my problem with that is that then that moods have phenomenology. And so if they're just these kinds of dispositions, then we lose the account of their phenomenal occurrence.
Well, they could have phenomenal effects.
Yeah.
But let me just actually throw this one last bit of thing just to think about. I think it's not implausible that like moods can actually affect non-conscious states. So like if, for example, the way in which like as of a couple minutes ago, non-occurrent belief that Trump is a buffoon, right? That non-conscious belief might have different downstream effects depending on mood I'm in. And if moods can affect non-conscious states, then it doesn't look like they should be characterized in terms of the structure of consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an alternative.
Yeah, I mean,
That's not the, yeah.
Thanks. So I like to talk a lot, and I like the exploration of this approach. And I have a lot of constructive thoughts on how to help develop the view. But that being said, I'm going to express my most antagonistic thought. So I'm worried that there's an internal tension in your view, and I'm going to express the worry by expressing an inconsistent triad of three premises. So the first premise is that moods are ways of being innerly aware. Second premise is that moods are global. So any subject is in one mood at a time, and mood doesn't differ across different parts of one's experience. So those two premises you elaborated in your talk. But the third premise is that ways of being inner aware are local. in that they vary across one's total experience. So the thought here is that inner awareness comes in degrees. For example, I'm more innerly aware of the center of my visual field than the periphery of my visual field. So these three premises, I think, are in tension with each other. And the basic thought is you can't identify moods with ways of being innerly aware if moods are global and ways of being innerly aware are local. And what I was thinking is that one way you could go is to identify moods with whole structures of inner awareness. But so you could take the totality of inner awareness states that characterize your total experience and say the mood is that thing.
Yeah.
But then my worry here is that there's going to be a mismatch with the phenomenological data that we just get from introspection, because moods don't seem to be structured in this way. It's not like my mood differs like in the center of my visual field versus the periphery of my visual field. And then the other thought is that you could deny that ways of being innerly aware are local in the sense that I'm talking about. You could deny that inner awareness does come in degrees. And I think that's an option, but then I guess personally I would worry that the notion of inner awareness would lose some of its explanatory power. Like insofar as I'm somebody who can put myself in a frame of mind where I'm sympathetic to inner awareness, that's partly because I'm thinking, well, if inner awareness is this thing that comes in degrees, it can help explain certain aspects of phenomenology. So what do you think?
Yeah, so yes, I would go, what do you think of having distinct ways? So there is not just one way that is a unified block, the way of inner awareness, but inner awareness can have different kinds of way. And so one way is the one that accounts for this foreground background structure, but the mood is a different way, and they don't necessarily come together. They don't kind of combine with one another. At least the combination of them, the co-occurrence of them, doesn't manifest phenomenologically. So that's what I would have in mind. We still have many.
Yeah.
So what I was thinking is that I don't know, I always try to do drawings, but it's okay.
Yeah.
So the idea is that the inner awareness is an awareness of the, we could see inner awareness and awareness of the totality of one's experiences. So like, I have many experiences, and so here is the totality, and so inner awareness is awareness of the totality. So it's not that you have awareness of this, awareness of this, awareness of this. So this is not. The idea is that you have one inner awareness of the overall, of the whole thing, and the mood modifies this. And then, like the salient structure, it has to do with a kind of secondary. So by being aware of the overall experience, then there are, and so there's more salient, like less salient, less salient. So this is what I was thinking while we're talking, that we can kind of have a how to say, we can divide the different ways of thinking of weight.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to go, but then I think you would need to say a lot about the metaphysics of inner awareness.
Yes,
For
of
one
course.
thing, it seems to me to call out for explanation why the kind of inner awareness that characterizes moods, or the way of being innerly aware that characterizes moods, has this whole like fundamentally different structure than the kind of inner awareness that we stand into different parts of our experiences. And that, I think, naturally leads to the thought of wondering whether these are actually just different kinds of things, whether they are both fundamentally of the same metaphysical kind.
Yeah, definitely.
Fernando?
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it very much also. So I would add another feature to the moods that, it seems to me it shares with salience, but not with unity and temporality, and that is malleability. They can manipulate our moods in some way. So, I mean, it's obvious in the case of salience, in the example you gave, that we can direct our attention towards different things, and apparently we can do it at will, right? We can decide whether to listen more attentively to the piano or to the trumpet or whatever. And the same it seems to me happen with moods. So I think Juan Pablo, right? So I think this is somehow related to what Juan Pablo said. So for example, in my case, which I assume is pretty typical, you tell me. So when I experience anxiety, it's like this free floating sensation, right? But it's a defensive reaction to try to latch on that sensation to something specific, right? So I say, why am I so anxious? Why am I so anxious? And I start thinking, well, I may be anxious about the paper or about a comment I made or about the relationship with my son or whatever, right? So in this way, and apparently we can also do this at will, right? I mean, in my case, you start thinking about a bunch of options and you say, well, I'm really anxious about the paper, right? And in this way, I say it's defensive because it serves to give a certain control over the emotion, right? If I work on my paper, that serves to alleviate the anxiety, right? And even you can transform the mood into emotion. For example, I'm really terrified of something, a neighbor, for example, and then transform the anxiety into a fear, right? So, and this is something we cannot do with unity or temporality, right? Which are structural and are completely out of my control, right? So I think in the case of moods, there is this control we have, and the purpose is to project the mood into the world so that we can make something more concrete, so that we can control the mood. It's more easily if we can see the mood as springing us, having this origin in a certain thing in the world. But at the same time, that this feature, it seems to me, contributes to a certain tendency to misidentify moods, right? At the end, you say something about they are factive. I think I misunderstood what you were saying.
No, I was saying inner awareness. Inner awareness is factive in the sense that,
Yeah, but I mean, you agree that it's frequent that we misidentify our mood, right?
yeah, that's another issue.
Okay,
That's
another
completely
issue.
another issue
Okay,
about like introspecting.
So I would just add that this feature, that this malleability of moods, I think contributes to misidentifying. I'm really anxious, but because of this defensive mood, I think, well, I'm worried about the paper, right? And in this way, I misidentify my anxiety. Which, for example, for Kierkegaard, it's just their reaction to the fact that we are free, right? And misidentify anxiety as just worriness, as just me being worried because of my pain, right? And the same can happen to elation or other emotion processes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think it's yes. This is interesting that there is a kind of asymmetry between unity and temporality on the one hand, and salience and moods on the other hand, in the sense that the latter, they are both somehow responsive, but the general thing is that they are responsive to some other factors, because it's not necessarily a question of agency. It could be that just my attention is captured by something.
Yeah.
And so I think that one fundamental issue is that they are responsive to something else, and to a certain extent, so to a greater extent in salience, and I think to a lesser extent, because if I was able to control my anxiety, then I would.
No, in this way, redirect, not control it, but redirect the anxiety.
Yeah, I think that it is much easier with salience. It's much easier to switch my attention than to switch my mood, but it's true that I can try to do something to put myself, I can have some agency. It's true. I can start like breathing, for example, stuff like that. But this is very interesting. I haven't thought about that. I don't know if this makes a fundamental difference there than to the metaphysical and phenomenological structure of these features. I have to think about that. This is very, very interesting. Thank you.
Extremely short.
Yeah, just there's a way of thinking about the temporality and unity also as malleable, for example, in meditative states or with drugs.
Yeah, but I was thinking temporality in the same way, but it just with what you say about the breathing, for example, those would be indirect methods of.
Yes.
So in the case of anxiety, I can directly start thinking, well, this state is caused by this object. So this is the cause. So this is different from the indirect methods.
Yeah, although I'm not totally sure about this part of what is, because like being anxious about the paper, it seems to me more like an emotion.
Yeah,
So
that's
at
the
that
point.
point, that point is like it's no longer the mood, it's the emotion. We have stuff.
Aurelia.
Thank you for your talk. I'll be very quick. So I'm actually interested in the more social dimension of your view. I was wondering, how can you account from what you presented that moods can be collective or contagious? Because that's I think you've made a point of how we feel about ourselves, but not about the social dimension of moods. And I'm just curious, I would like to know.
So I haven't thought about this, but so like on the spot, I would say that this has to do with not with the nature of the mood, but with causal relations. And so if there is anything as like if I'm very down, like there's a kind of black hole in the room, and it kind of sucks, and it puts other people slightly in a bad mood or something like that. That's just an issue of causal connections, I would say.
But if it has to do with inner awareness, they should not be.
So my mood that is accounted for as like the way I'm experiencing my own mental life causes a certain behavior or like outward appearance of me that you perceive, and that causes in you another kind of mental state, and that triggers. Perhaps it causes some emotion and that triggers a certain mood. So there is a causal chain from my state of mind to your state of mind. That's the way I would account for it.
Okay, thank you.
Uriah, please.
I have a question about anti-touchability.
Mm-hmm.
So you may need, for the purposes of your argument, that mood be anti-touchable only typically or characteristically, or you may need it. I haven't thought this through. You may need them to be so universally and essentially. I only have a problem if the claim is of a universality and essentiality, because that would mean that essential claim is it's not possible to conceive of a mind that has just a mood. And I just conceived it, so I want to ask about it. Tell me where I got it wrong. So what I conceived is this: I conceived of Robert reaching enlightenment and being able to kind of meditate into like where the way like advanced meditators represent there's like nothing left, it just pure awareness and calm. And so usually Robert does this in his office, but in this case he does it in a sensory deprivation tank. So he's sitting in a sensory deprivation tank and into this state of like pure calmness, and that's all there is in his mind. What do you think about my case?
Sounds great.
I guess I would say two things. So one thing is, so I don't know. So I may be okay with the typically thing if also other structural features are okay with the typically thing. So if we can form like an imagination of a creature that can have just a sense of unity, perhaps, Or perhaps some people talk about this pure awareness. So if we can form that, then perhaps all structure, but although like salience, that's not possible, just salience, foreground and background, you need to have some mental states. So perhaps I can be okay with the typicality thing, but the other thing I wanted to say is that perhaps we are not imagining like very clearly, and perhaps we're just imagining like descriptively that Robert is in that kind of state, but at least there has to be some kind of perhaps just awareness, I don't know, or something for the columnist to be there. So I would go probably for the latter, that we are not really imagining clearly the case, and if we really imagine it clearly, then we see that there needs to be at least one experience, one minimal kind of experience there to come with the calmness. That's what I would answer.
I'll go back to Madara, please.
Oh. So the consciousness of the moods, because for example of the moods you had depression, and I was thinking many people need to engage in dialogue with someone to do analysis, to be conscious of this mood, and so
Yeah, so I guess that we should make a distinction between like the clinical state that could just I mean, if I'm not aware of being depressed, my depressive state is just dispositional, and so it manifests itself in other ways in my life, and then I need to go to therapy to realize that. So that's one thing. That's one kind of phenomenon. What I'm talking about is phenomena that are mental phenomena that are phenomenal conscious, and so a depressive state that is not necessarily associated with the clinical condition. It could be it could be put together, but it can also just be I'm in a depressive state.
Carlos, por favor.
Thank you for your talk. I was just curious because I was thinking something similar to what colleague here said during your presentation. I'm not quite familiar with the literature, but I would like to know if you have thought of if you need like some mechanism to explain how moods change, as well as how, for example, phenomenal salience change. I don't know if there's something about that in the literature, but I think it will be something related to what he said, that there's some common feature there that could to explore in your argument.
Yeah, what I was thinking is that it's due to some causal connections to whatever is going on in the rest of one's mental life. And so having some emotion may kind of trigger a certain mood, or trigger like the increasing intensity of a certain mood, etc. So this is what I was thinking. Then it's true that then there is the issue like, okay, well, how does exactly that work? Like, how is it possible that a certain discrete mental representation has some causal effect on this completely different thing that is the structural affective feature of the overall phenomenal field? Although if you compare this with salience and the foreground background structure, like a sudden very intense sound popping up in my experience, it is a new representation, and it triggers immediately a reconfiguration of the salient structure of my phenomenal field. So that becomes the most salient aspect because it captures my attention. And so perhaps there could be something analogous there.
Esteban.
Very quickly, because I think we have like a minute. So you said, please correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you didn't, but you said on the one hand, your proposal mainly that moods are ways of being aware of inner experiences, but on the other hand, you clarified that, but this is a question, you seem to say, if I understood you well, that it's not an inner representation of inner experience. And I'm just not exactly clear why that couldn't be compatible with the rest of what you said. I mean, just to put it one way, and this may be preposterous, but perhaps if this inner awareness is some sort of inner perceptual state, and it's a state, there could be a state that you could be conscious of or not, like many other states.
Yes, you're totally right, and that has to do with how then one develops the details of the view. Because, like I was mentioning at a certain point, there could be with the exchange with Andrik, you could have a development of the view such that inner awareness is meta representation, and so in the end there is, and so you may go that way, but you will have to say more things. But there are ways of accounting for inner awareness, not in this way. And it's like the acquaintance, the self-acquaintance that I have in mind is different. Which I have in mind something more like a structural structural modification of the mental state, and so that would go nicely with the overall framework. But that depends on how you develop the metaphysical details of the view. So you're totally right. You're pointing at the right thing, the right tension. There is a tension depending on the details.
So I'm gonna almost have one very good. One very quick. So in your view, you have this manner of awareness that correspond to the mood. And I was wondering, so whether you can make sense of here some intuitive ideas, like, for example, there are some moods, I'm not sure about whether it's a mood, but the mood of loneliness, there seems to be a case where we don't have an object correspond to those things, but I clearly can detach that from any other thing. So the feeling of loneliness is something that I can really make sense of without any other, and in this case is detachable. But also this view gives us, this idea brings you to the idea of affective similarity, and I can totally make sense of being in one mood and having an experience who has a completely different affective direction, like being happy and feeling pain. That seems totally right for me. I mean, maybe not a horrible pain, but the affectiveness of the pain, I don't know, I fail to understand in which sense is affectively similar to my happiness.
Yeah, so yeah, the second problem is that you can have different moods at the same time. Is that it?
I was only happy. No, I'm happy. So pain is no mood. I'm just happy.
Okay, so now you're not even thinking about like a pain as a mood, like I'm in pain, like I'm suffering.
No, just pain.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's the problem with to overcome the intuition that the pain is not tinged at all with the joy, is still thinking in terms of like what's the content, and instead I'm trying to think about like the overall experience has this kind of affective color over all of it, and it's not that the pain itself, the sensation is joyful, but it's the way I am aware of it as I'm aware of all the other experiences that is different. So it's a state I am in, and in virtue of that, all the experiences I have this affective color in common. And so it's the color is not projected necessarily on the content of the representation. That's what I was thinking. But and the loneliness, I have to think about. That's a nice example. Yeah.
So thank you very much.